We are on Daf. Today's Daf is Daf Yud Aleph 11, and we are on Yud Amid Beis 10b at the Mishnah. We had learned about the obligation of B'dikas Chametz and where we have to check, and now we're going to see when the times of checking are. We learned originally that the checking for Chametz is going to be on the night of the 14th, meaning after the 13th, going to the 14th of Nisan. And here we're going to see what happens if somebody didn't check then. When else must one check? So Rabbi Yehuda ime baitkin or Yudalid, uvi Yudalid chachris, ubishas habir. Rabbi Yehuda says that you have to check for Chametz at the night of the 14th, the morning of the 14th, and at the time of the destruction of the chametz, at the burning of the chametz. And the Gemara at first is going to think he means all three, and then the Gemara is going to prove that what he means is at one of those points. If he didn't check at the 14th at night, meaning 13th going into the 14th, so then he should check in the morning. And if he didn't check on the 14th, yivdek b'toich hamoed. So generally, this would be translated as in the Chag, in the middle of the Yantiv, and that's the way Tosfos takes it. However, Rashi says that what this means at the proper time, meaning at the time of the destruction of the chametz, when you have to destroy the chametz. Lo badak b'toich hamoed. If you didn't destroy it at that time, which Rashi says at the time that you have to. If you didn't check at the time they have to destroy the chametz, so then yivduk la'achar, then you even check going into the Chag after the time that you have to destroy the chametz. And this is all according to Rashi, that you only have to check for chametz if there's a chance of a Torah prohibition, which would be during the Chag. However, Tosfos interprets this as you have to check for chametz during the Chag, and even after the Chag. If you missed Chag and you didn't check before Yantiv, you didn't check on Yantiv, you have to check after Yantiv, because if they find any chametz that was left in the house, you can't eat it, because later we'll see that if somebody owned chametz on Pesach, that is now prohibited for them for consumption. And this would be a rabbinic prohibition as a penalty for owning the chametz and transgressing the prohibition of owning chametz. So you can't use that chametz, you have to look for it. But that would be looking for a rabbinic prohibition, and Rashi doesn't hold that that's the enactment of checking for chametz. Rashi says it's in order not to transgress the Torah prohibition of bal yirah, bal yimatzeh, not to find chametz in your house. So therefore, Rashi says that it doesn't mean you check on Yantiv or after Yantiv, but rather at the time that you destroy the chametz or after that time, which would be during Chag. And whatever you leave over for the next day, you have to put away properly, so you don't have to go back and check afterwards if you find anything missing, as we just saw in the multiple cases that there may be an obligation to recheck. So the Gemara first asks about Rabbi Yehuda. Why would you, based on its assumption that it means checking 3 times, you have to check at night, check in the morning, and then check at the time of the burning of the chametz. So my time at Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda? So Rav Chisda and Rabbi Bar Avuna Damar Havayu. Rav Chisda, both Rav Chisda and Rabbi Bar Avuna explain this. Keneged sholosh hashpasa shabator. It's the 3 terms, the 3 concepts that the Torah says in regards to not owning chametz on Pesach. It says lo yora lecha chametz, lo yora lecha sar. It says once it shall not be seen to you, meaning you shall not see both leavening or chametz itself. So you shall not see it. And then it says 7 days you shall not find leavening, so don't see it, don't find it. And but on the first day you should remove or cease to make cease chametz in your houses. So that's the 3rd term. The 2 negatives, don't find it, don't see it, and the positive of make it cease to be. These 3 terms, so there's 3 times for checking. Masav Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef challenged this. So you understand that Rabbi Yehuda says you have to check 3 times. Rabbi Yehuda said, he says anybody that did not check in these 3 times doesn't check anymore. Alma, you see, it seems to be that all he's arguing on is whether or not you could check later or you have to check if you miss these times. But he's not arguing on the times beforehand, meaning he's not arguing that you need to check 3 times, only you check one of these 3 times, and if you missed it, too bad, you lost the opportunity to check for chametz, but you don't check during Yantav itself, and the Gemara is going to explain the reasoning soon. He's only arguing about from here and onward if you miss the time. So Marzutta Masna Hachi. Marzutta says that the question Rabbi Yosef asked was more direct even. The Rabbi Yehuda Eimer, there's a brisa that says Kol Shalei Badak Be'echad Mishloisha Prakim. That the brisa says if somebody didn't check in one of these 3 times, clearly indicating that the checking is in one of the 3 times, not that you have to actually check 3 times, but these are 3 appropriate times for checking. You miss them, then there are no makeup opportunities. Shuv ein abaydik, then you don't check it anymore. Alma b'shuv ein abaydik good please. You see that Rabbi Yehuda is only disagreeing in regards to whether you need to check at all after you miss these 3 points or not. Ella Rabbi Yehuda nami im loy badakama. So it must be Rabbi Yehuda's also saying if you didn't check at night, you check in the morning. You didn't check in the morning, you check when you're burning the chametz. And so what is the basis of the machlokes? Mar sava mekami isuri in basi isuri loy. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that you only check for chametz before the time of the prohibition. Once the time of the prohibition comes, you no longer check for chametz. Why? Dilma asila mechlamini. Because we're concerned. You're looking for chametz, and you're going to find some, and you're going to be focused on what you're doing, and you're going to forget that there's a prohibition. You're going to eat some. The Gemara later is going to say that the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. They're going to say, "Oh, your focus is on getting rid of the chametz. You're not going to eat it. You're as laser focused as possible not to eat chametz. You're trying to get rid of it." Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion you may. If you're asking for trouble, you're looking for the very thing that you're not allowed to eat. We're afraid that you're going to come to eat it, so don't look. Once the time of prohibition comes, no checking. Rabbanan Sabri legazrina, and Rabbanan say, and no, there's no such concern. So the Gemara now is going to challenge this very idea of whether or not we look for or we prohibit any interaction with something that's prohibited, lest you come to eat it. And we're going to see various opinions, sometimes contradictory. And we're going to see that there is such a concept that the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda both are going to say that sometimes we say, don't interact with that because it's a prohibited item. And therefore, don't interact with it. Maybe you're going to come to use it. However, what the basis for that concern is going to be different. And so sometimes Rabbi Yehuda is going to be strict and the Chachamim lenient, and sometimes vice versa. And is Rabbi Yehuda really concerned about maybe you're going to come to eat from this chametz? Vatanan, we learned in regards to the prohibition of chadash, the Torah prohibits until the morning of the 2nd day of Pesach, where the omer is brought as a korban. No new grains from that season are allowed to be consumed. All chadash, all new grains may not be consumed until such time that the omer was brought. Furthermore, the fields that are available to the korban omer, which would be the bringing of the first of the omer, the first bundle, to the Beis Hamikdash and being made into a mincha offering, which would allow all the grains to be consumed after that. From those fields that are available for this korban, you may not even bring the sickle to the stalk. You may not even start harvesting. Tanan, and we learned Mishakarava Omer. Once the Omer, this offering, this meal offering, coming from the first of the grains, of the barley are brought as a korban. Yotzin, then they would go out and immediately you would immediately find that all of the shops were full of flour from the new grain and toasted grains from the new grain. And now we're on 11a on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. And the Mishnah says that the Chachamim did not agree to this. Rabbi Meir says the Chachamim were disappointed with this. They didn't want this to happen because that means that prior to that point, everybody was already dealing with the grains. They were harvesting and they were winnowing and threshing and winnowing and grinding and sorting. All of the work that's needed to bring the market, to bring the produce to market, to bring flour and toasted grains to the market would have been done already, and you're not allowed to consume any of that. Rabbi Yehuda says, no such concern. The Chachamim were very happy that the markets were immediately available for people to buy the new grains. And in that case, Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned. Why? Maybe these people that are harvesting and winnowing and toasting and grinding, that they're going to come to eat some of the produce. Amar Rabba, so Rabba said, Shani Chadash well, actually, he says, the Torah prohibits using a sickle. You're not allowed to actually harvest in a normal way. So the only way they would make this was by actually just pulling the grains off of the wheat stalk heads. They would pull they wouldn't do a proper harvest, and so that's a good reminder that you can't eat it because you're doing it in such a difficult and abnormal way. Amalei Abayis said, actually, Tainach B'Shas Katifa, that's fine while you harvest. But once you up to grinding and sifting, at that point, you don't remember how it was done out in the field. You're already up to something that at this point that all looks the same. So Gemara says, those two were also done differently. That the grinding was not done in the typical water mill. It was done in a hand mill, which is more difficult and a reminder. And as well as the sifting was not done on the inner side of the sifter, it was done on the outer side of the sifter, more difficult and less productive. And also, so all these were a means for reminding. It was a way to remember that this is a prohibition. So we're on 11a towards the top. So Rabbi Yehuda over here is making a distinction. By chametz, he says, don't check for chametz on Pesach. Once the prohibition starts, you shouldn't check for chametz on Pesach because you may come to eat it if you're looking for it. Whereas in regards to the new grain in the Chadash, he says, true that you can't eat it until the second morning of Pesach when they would bring the Omer offering, but you can already deal with start the harvest and the grinding and the sifting because they were all done in an abnormal way. They were done in a different way to remind you, don't consume any of it. Well, that's fine according to in the fields that the chametz would normally come from. That the offering of the Omer would normally come from. But what about this that we learned? Fields that need irrigation because they don't get enough rain, and so the wheat and the barley are not growing well on their own, and they need additional irrigation. Or the fields where the barley is growing in valleys. There, you're allowed to actually harvest them normally. Even though we said that the fields that where the korban omer, where the meal offering of the omer would come from, may not be harvested in a typical manner, because the Torah says that reishis katzirchem. The Torah says that the omer has to come from the first of your where the sickle hits the stalks, so the first of the harvest. But these fields are typically not used for the Omer because they're not the best produce because they needed additional irrigation, or they're in the valleys, they're not getting enough sun. So therefore, the Omer wouldn't come from there, and therefore you're allowed to harvest it. And over there, they're not making any changes, yet it's still prohibited. You can harvest first, but you're not allowed to eat any of the produce. And there, you're harvesting in a normal way, and yet Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned that you're going to come to eat it. Avalot good. It's just that you're not allowed to make a typical pile or silo full of produce, of grains. Well, Kimnik, Rabbi Yehuda. And over there, we explain that, the Gemara Menachos explained that Mishnah in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who's not concerned about you eating some of the produce while you're making it. Michael Amema. So what are you going to say over there? What changes did he make? And why is Rabbi Yehuda not concerned? Elama Abayis, or rather Abayis has a different reason. Chadash Badil Mine. The distinction is this. Until the second morning on Pesach, until the Omer is brought, everybody knows that you can't eat the new grains until that day, until the carbon is brought. So for every year, there's this idea that we're separated from the new grain, and you can only use the old grains and until Pesach comes. So people are separated from it. Whereas chametz loy badamine, but chametz all year round you eat it. There's no reason to be separated, and now it's the first day of separation. It's either Erev Yantiv in the evening, in the afternoon, or on one of the days of Yantiv, and you say, "Oh my goodness, I didn't check for chametz." You start checking, even though that you know it's Pesach, but you're not used to not eating chametz, and therefore you may come to eat. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda says, "Don't check for chametz on Yantiv, because you may come to eat it, because you're not separated from it." Amar Rava, the Rabbi Yehuda Kasha. The Rabbanan Kasha says, great. So you explained to us why Rabbi Yehuda, in regards to chametz, is strict, and in regards to the grains, the new grains, the chadash, is not concerned. But what about the Rabbanan? They're also opposite. Over here, they say check for chametz, and in regards to the new grains, they were not happy that the people were making. Were harvesting and toasting the grains and grinding and making flour, and that the moment the carbon was brought, the markets were filled. And they didn't like that. Why? Because maybe somebody would come to eat it. That's also a contradiction. In chametz, they say check for chametz, they're not concerned. And here, in regards to the Omer, they're concerned. So the Gemara says, you're right. It's a question both ways. And Rabbi Yehuda, we just answered. The Rabbanan Nami Lekasha, and the Rabbanan is not a concern. Why? Because what's going on by chametz? He's checking for chametz in order to destroy it. His whole purpose is to find chametz in order to destroy it, to burn it. He's laser focused on getting rid of chametz. You think he's going to eat it? So they're not concerned about eating a chametz when you're checking your home to destroy it. That's what he's setting out to do. There's no concern that he's going to come to eat it. However, in regards to the produce that he's preparing for sale, so he's actually harvesting and toasting the grains and grinding in order to make flour, all for the purpose of actually making this available and making it and producing it a good product. So there's a concern. He may try it and eat it. Rav Ashi Ahmed Rabbi Yehuda Kasha Kemach V'Kali Tanah. Rabbi Yehuda says, there's no concern. Rabbi Yehuda is not a question. Without the explanations we just said that badul minei, lo badul minei, is he separated or not? So nobody eats flour. Nobody eats toasted oats, toasted grains just like that. Kemach v'kali tana. He's just eating. He's just dealing with things that are not edible. The Gemara says, but it's a mistake. The Rav Ashi Badusi. That's a mistake. Because that's true once you've already ground it or once you've already toasted it. But a farmer would typically take some of the grains that they just harvested and taste it and eat it, and a wheat berry is good. So it's true. Once you're up to the grinding, nobody's going to eat a spoonful of flour, but they may eat before that process. And if you're telling me, well, no, that at that point he's not doing a regular harvest, kidarava, like Rava said, or Rabba said, but we also have the Mishnah that there are some places that Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to use a proper sickle and harvest in a normal way. Rabbi Yehuda, what are you going to say about that? Ella the Rav Ashi Vadusi. So therefore, we must say that the answer of Ashi says that it's not a problem, not a contradiction of Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is talking about making flour, which is not edible. No, it's not true, because he's even talking about regular harvesting as well, and there's still no concern. So much must be that the reason is that this distinction is chametz. You're not separated from, so he says don't check for it, and chadash, the new grain, you're separated. You have not. It's not been permitted from the start. So therefore, you're already used to not having any of it, and you're waiting for the time that it becomes permissible for the first time, and therefore you're not going to come to eat it. The Gemara is going to ask from halacha of Shabbos, where actually two halachas of Shabbos, where Rabbi Yehuda allows you to interact with something that may be usher. The halacha is that you're not allowed to extinguish a fire or actually create a fire on Shabbos. You're also not allowed to add or diminish a fire. So if you have a cup of oil and a wick in it as a candle, you're not allowed to take some oil out from that cup to make a salad dressing. Say, oh my goodness, we're out of oil. Oh, there's a cup of olive oil there with the wick in it, and the wick's alight, and so that's my Shabbos candle. I'm just going to take some out, and you take a spoon and you take some out. You're not allowed to do that because you're diminishing the fire, even though the flame itself right now does not change. Let's say it's a big enough plate that you can get rid of it. You can do it without changing the flame or the fire. Nevertheless, you're speeding up the end of this fire. You're removing some of the fuel, and that's going to be a prohibition. So the Chachamim say sometimes in order to make the oil burn slower, what they would do is they would have the oil or the fuel in a separate vessel and allow it to drip in or run in very slowly. So this way the wick is not drawing up too much of the fuel at once. So you're only allowed, the Mishnah says, you're only allowed to do this if they are actually attached beforehand. You have a cup with a hole in it, and it's attached to the candle, and so it's dripping in slowly. Then, since it's attached, you're going to know that you don't take oil out of there. However, you can't just take a secondary vessel and put it near there and let it drip in, because you may end up taking some of the oil out. Rabbi Yehuda says we're not concerned. The Tanan, we learned, don't use an eggshell and make a hole in it, and fill it with oil, and put it near the candle so that it drips in and as a fuel, and it'll be a slow fuel. And even if the cup that you're putting there is earthenware, which is usually not so clean and nice, and you're not likely to want to consume some of the oil and you won't take any out. And the reason is because you may come to take some out, and this way you're diminishing the fuel of this fire, and that's a form of extinguishing the fire. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we're not concerned that you're going to take any out of there, and he permits you to make such a system of a slow drip fuel for the flame. Hasam mishum chumra de Shabbos mavda b'dila. The Gemara says, no, there, because Shabbos is so important and so strict, people are separated, and they're not going to be involved with taking oil out of there, and so he's not concerned. Shabbos is important. You're not going to come to consume the oil. With the chadash, you're already separated from it. But chametz, it's separated, and you're not separated from it, and you're not used to it. So we're afraid if you're checking for the chametz, you're actually interacting with it, you may come to eat it. V'rami the Shabbos, and we have a contradiction in Shabbos itself. The Tani, we learned, chevel deli shenifsak. One of the 39 principal prohibitions of Shabbos is knotting, making a permanent knot. If you have a well, and you have a bucket on a rope, which you draw the water in the well, and the rope snapped, and you now want to tie that rope back together again. Lo yeh kosher, don't make a knot. Ela einvoy, rather make a bow. Rabbi Yehuda Eimer karach olav punda ipesakya. Rabbi Yehuda says you can only tie a belt of some sort. There are two types of belts, a punda and a pesakya, and that you can use these to these ties, and you wrap them. You don't actually tie them. But don't make a tie. The Gemara thinks the reason is because if you're going to tie it, you're going to end up also knotting it, making a permanent knot, even though that a bow, a tie, is not going to be a Torah prohibition because it's not the principal form of a permanent knot. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda says don't do it because maybe if you're interacting with it, you're going to come to make a knot. Kasha de Rabbi Yehuda. So we have a contradiction. We see oil. You can make this slow drip for the oil, and we're not concerned you're going to take some out. With the knotting, he's afraid that you are going to make a knot. And Kasha de Rabbanan, and there's a contradiction in the Rabbanan as well. They're worried about the oil. They're not worried about the knotting. The Rabbanan, the run like Kasha Shema Michlaf. The Rabbanan say, well, actually, with oil, it's all the same oil. So if you're interacting with the oil, there's no two oils, one for fuel and one for salads. It's all the same oil, and therefore, if you're gonna be interacting with the oil, or you have this oil there, you may end up taking some of the oil out because it's all the same oil. Whereas aniva b'kshira lemichlaf. But if the fact that you have to make a bow, which means that it's a different type of tie, that's enough to remember that you can't make a knot. And so you're not going to interact, you're not going to change and make a mistake about those. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, there's also not a contradiction. Time of Rabbi Yehuda lav mishum de gazar aniva tekshira. He says, really, it's not that he's concerned if you make a bow, you may end up making a knot. But rather, he says a bow itself is also going to be a type of knot, and that's also a Torah prohibition. It's only if you're using a type of belt that you would never leave there permanently. It's a part of your clothing, so you're not going to leave it there because you need it, and therefore you're allowed to use it because it won't be permanent. But any type of rope that you're doing any type of knot, whether a permanent knot or a bow is also a permanent knot because if you may end up leaving it that way. V'rami the Rabbanan and the Rabbanan. We have a contradiction of the Rabbanan itself. The Tanan we learned. Koshring deli b'psakya avale b'chevel. It says the Rabbanan say you're allowed to tie the rope with a psakya, which is a type of ornamental or a garment type of belt, ribbon. But not with a rope. Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to use a rope. Are we talking about a regular rope? That can't be. Rabbi Yehuda would allow this keshal kayami. That's going to be a Torah prohibition of a permanent knot. The vade also leave it too late because he's for sure going to leave it there if he's using a rope. Elapshi to the gardi. So must be that it's a type of rope that usually is used for weaving, and he needs that rope. He's going to need it for his weaver. So he's for the process of weaving. He's going to take this back after Shabbos. So it's only a temporary solution, and so therefore Yud allows it. And the Rabbanan say no, you're not allowed to use that type of rope, even though that we know you're right. Rabbi Yehuda, he's going to take it back tomorrow because he needs it for his weaving. But nevertheless, right now, he's using a rope. He may come to use a different rope. So the Gemara says, in chevel bechevel michlaf. Because again, according to the Chachamim, if it's the same type of substance, it's the same type of material, it's the same type of item, those that are concerned, if you're going to allow him to use a rope that's, even though it's a weaver's rope, he's going to need it for, he may end up using it a regular rope, and therefore they don't allow using any type of rope. You could only use a belt or a sash or something like that. Whereas they're not concerned that you're going to end up, but they allow you to make a bow because that's a different type of knot, and you won't make a mistake and use a regular knot. However, Rabbi Yehuda, he said he makes the distinction of whether it's badol minei, whether you're separated from it or not, and that's the principal distinction that Rabbi Yehuda makes. Is this something that you're typically not going to go to? You're separated already, or it's a new prohibition, which so in Shabbos you're separated already. We're not concerned about the oil because you already know not to do it. With Chadash, you're separated already from it, so we're not concerned. Chametz, you're not separated. It's a new prohibition. We're afraid that you're going to end up eating it. And with the rope, his only concern is that even a bow counts as a real knot. Now the Gemara challenges. So you said that the basis for Rabbi Yehuda is if it's something that he's already used to being separated from, he's not concerned that you're going to come to eat it. But Tanya, what about this that we learned? Bechor, the firstborn of an animal has to go to the Kohen. The Kohen gets this new firstborn animal, and it's essentially kadosh to him. He's not allowed to make a blemish. He's not allowed to make a mum in it. The Torah says he may not. It may be eaten when it has a blemish, but you're not allowed to make the blemish. And now this animal has a fever. It's ill. So at time we learn even if it's going to die, you're not allowed to do a bloodletting, which was a way that they would heal the animal. Rabbi says you're not allowed to. Anywhere, even in a place that it'll heal and it won't become a blemish, nevertheless, you're not allowed to do this because he's afraid if you do it in this area, you may end up doing it in an area that will count as a blemish. And the Chachamim say, Yakiz, no problem, go ahead and do it. As long as you're careful not to do it in a place that will cause a blemish. So Gemara says here too, Rabbi Yehuda is concerned, because we turn the page, and because Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that a person is so concerned about his animal that it's going to die, that Amrina ni sharisale, if you allow him to do it in a place that has no blemish, he's going to end up being so distraught and concerned and act hastily and not be not be careful and end up making the giving the animal a blemish, and that's a Torah prohibition. V'Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan say, no, kol shekain. Then for sure, if you tell them, oh, your animal's dying and you cannot help it at all, then for sure, then he's just going to do it out of distress. So for sure, it's better to allow him to do it where he's allowed to do it, so he doesn't get distressed and do it wrong. Now the Gemara challenges again. This concept that you said that the reason Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to do the bloodletting on the animal that's sick because he may be in distress and end up doing it the wrong way. Is that a concern that a person will be financially distressed and then come to do something on Shabbos? But now we learned Rabbi Yehuda Eimer. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein mekadrin." You're not allowed to brush or scrape an animal's back because you're going to end up making a scratch and cause blood to come out, and that's going to be a Torah prohibition. But you're allowed to do something, a process that's similar called mekarzafin, which uses a blunter, wider brush or comb tooth, which will scrape it but not cause it to bleed. You can't do either. And we say, what's the distinction between kidur and kirtzuf? Kidur ketana v'isachabura. They're small, fine teeth on the scraper, and it can make a wound. Kirtzuf gedol v'isachabura, and kirtzuf are the larger ones, and they won't make a blemish. Won't make a wound. So the Gemara says, "Hasami the shav kilei mayis." I'm reading other balam and says, no, there's no comparison. In the first case, Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that a person may be distressed. That's because the animal may die if you don't take care of it. So that's causing a great distress, and he may end up doing the wrong type of blemish. It may causing a blemish by doing the wrong type of procedure. Whereas here in the scratching of the animal's back, the animal's uncomfortable. It's got an itch. So you're not so distressed, and you're not going to end up doing the wrong thing. For that, we don't say a person is concerned and will end up doing the wrong thing. So now the Gemara says, okay, Rabbi Yehuda, the Gazar. Why is it by chametz? He says you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to check for chametz. This process of scraping the animal is so distinct from the other that you're not going to make a mistake. But bread and matzah is something that a person is going to mix up. So we see various opinions in various scenarios where either Rabbi Yehuda or the Chachamim are concerned that there's going to be some sort of mix-up, and you're going to end up doing the wrong thing. And in each one, there's a reason why one felt that it was enough of a concern to make offense, and the other said there isn't. Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer, Oichlin kol chamesh v'surfim betchila sheish. So you check for chametz, and you got rid of it, and now when's the end of time for eating chametz? The Torah prohibition we saw was at noon, which is the end of halachic 6 hours. The beginning of the 6 hours is an hour mistake that a person can make where the sun, it looks like it's noon to them already, especially on a cloudy day. So Rabbi Meir says you can eat chametz all the way up to, let's call it 11 o'clock, an hour before halachic noon. But the last hour, kol sheish, you cannot eat it. So Rabbi Meir says, ochlin kol chamesh, you eat all 5 hours of the morning. V'sarfim betchila sheish, and at the beginning of the 6th hour, at 11 o'clock, you have to destroy the chametz. However, Rabbi Yehuda says you need another hour of offense. Rabbi Yehuda Eimer, ochlin kol arba, you can eat the first 4 hours of the morning. However, you have to stop at 10 o'clock halachic time, right? So 10 o'clock is an example, approximately 4 hours, not approximately 4 hours, 4 hours, 4 halachic hours, which is dividing the day into 12 parts. And each part would then be, depending on whether it's in the summer, sometimes it'll be an hour and a half per part. And in the winter, it can be 45 minutes per part, because we're dividing the hour in 12 hours. These are shos manias, halachic hours based on the division of 12 from morning to night. But for practical purposes, we're going to just call it at 6 o'clock morning, 6 o'clock p.m. evening, noon is at 12. And so in that scenario, at 10 o'clock, you have to stop eating chametz already. You can eat for 4 hours of the morning. And then v'tolen kol chamesh, and from 10 to 11, the 5th hour of the day, the entire 5th hour, you can't eat, but you can feed it to your animals, and you can still benefit from it. V'sarfim betchila sheish, at the beginning of the 6th hour, which is at 11 o'clock, you start destroying the chametz. V'odam Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda further said that they used to have a way to remind people on the Beis Hamikdash, on the Temple Mount, on Har HaBayis, they would have in itztaba, they'd have a platform with 2 breads that were no longer, that were from a mincha, from a toda, that were no longer permissible to be eaten, which were chametz. So they would have chametz breads on this itztaba. Because mancha menachas, as long as these 2 breads were there, you were allowed to eat kalam eichlim. You can eat nitla achas mem, when the custodians of the Beis Hamikdash would take one of them away. So then, lo eichlin, you no longer are allowed to eat chametz. However, v'lei surfim, but you weren't obligated to burn it yet. Nitlu, now that both were taken, hischilu kalam surfim, that's when everybody would burn the remainder of their chametz, and there was an hour until the Torah prohibition set in. Rabbi Gamliel says, well, wait, this is all good for chametz that is not a Torah obligation to eat, like your personal chametz, chulin, not mundane chametz. However, teruma, which is a Torah obligation, you can't just give me an extra hour of offense and then you're not going to eat the teruma, which is you're going to burn teruma for no reason. So teruma kol chamesh, your kohen may continue eating teruma in the entire from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, the 5th halachic hour. The surfer betchila sheish, and then all of it would be burned at the beginning of the 6th hour. Tomorrow we'll continue with the Gemara and analyzing these times.